Welcome to Young and Limitless. And in today's episode, you're going to hear a conversation between myself and a young man called Luca, who's 20 and he's amazing. He is the Young Members Officer for the Unison Surrey County Council branch. And he is going to share his passion and his commitment to helping young people form communities where they can have their voice be heard and impact the world in which they live. So, guys, enjoy listening. So, Luca, what made you interested in anything to do with unions?
I'd been involved in sort of activism and politics, I suppose, since I was still in secondary school. And when I started working, when I left secondary school, it seemed to be an obvious sort of extension of the activities that I did before, and a way to get involved in terms of rights at work, and I was interested in that sort of stuff. So I joined my union and became more involved over the years.
How old were you when you joined the union?
Um, I joined straight out of school, so 18.
When you said you were interested in activism in school, what issue sparked your imagination?
Um, I think there's always been sort of uh, issues that have um, been present in sort of life for the past few years that sort of, I think, for myself as well as many other young people, have been sort of a mobilizing thing. Obviously, there's like green issues, um, social issues. Um, I don't think it's um, unknown to that things at the moment aren't the best in terms of opportunities, uh, social rights, all these sorts of things. And I think growing up with that as a background, I think it kind of made me want to get involved.
Do you think the unions have a part to play in organising a peaceful way of being heard?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the social movements that have come in the past few years, there's definitely um, an organized factor in them. With Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that, they didn't come out of nowhere, and there's organizing behind them. I think when it comes to unions, um, there's about, I think it's 6 million people that are in a union in this country. That's a massive amount of people that can be mobilized and should be mobilized to get involved and engaged in these sorts of issues. I mean, obviously, the ones that the unions are involved with mainly around employment rights, and rights at work. But there's so many other things that um, you know link into that. It's not just rights at work. There are many social issues that are present in society at large that are obviously going to play into rights at work as well as broader issues. So I think the unions definitely should have a place there. I don't think that they've been the most active in the past few years, but
Mhm.
certainly I'd like to see them become more active, and it's something that I try and push for.
Yeah. So I think the stats are between 16 and 24. Most people in that age group don't have any faith in unions because they think they're not really listened to, which is so different because where I was in the 90s, that was a powerful driving force.
Mm.
So how do you think that could be changed?
Um, I think it is difficult. I think um, what's changed slightly is what sort of work young people are doing now compared to the past, and the environment that we're in at the moment in terms of student debt and these sorts of things as a background to how young people are working. I think those are important. I think there is a sort of distrust of unions. I think it's less a distrust and more just sort of um, a feeling of kind of hopelessness in a way, that they
Mm.
don't see that there hasn't been any big changes that have come about recently. And certainly when people try and change stuff for change stuff themselves in their workplace as individuals, they're often push back, and they don't see much change when they try and change stuff as individuals. And I think if that's your experience of trying to get better pay or whatever it is at work, then you're going to make the connection of, oh well, when I tried it myself it didn't work, so how will this be any different? I think it needs to be making that case for collective action amongst young people, because I think at large young people understand the power of collective action. That's why so many people get involved in protests and stuff like that. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's just a bit of a disconnect when it comes to um, work and employment rights, and getting people to understand that collective action works there as well.
So that is a big, tall task, isn't it? Because if your personal experience tells you that, I've tried it and it's failed, there's no point. How then do you show them that together we can do more? We have a much more powerful voice.
I think it is about sort of getting people in the workplaces, because one of the other issues, as well as hope, that sort of feeling of hopelessness, is that it isn't the case that young people are in large workplaces with a large workforce. On the most part, a lot are in sort of hospitality, the service sector, where you might only share, a shop with a few dozen colleagues. So
Mm.
I think what's important there is getting people, organizers, to go into those workplaces and sort of show themselves that they're there to support those young people. And once you build a network there, then I think that's how you get people involved, as well as getting better at communicating when we can achieve stuff. I mean, I know that one of the unions, Unite, is organizing around tip pay for Pizza Express workers because they've had theirs cut recently.
Mm.
Um, I think it that's a good thing, and it's great that they're doing that. I think they should be better and louder at showing that that's what they can do with collective action, is pushing that employer to reinstate the tips for I think it's the waiters and waitresses. um, I think it needs to be more of that and louder.
Mm. So when you said about tips and that kind of like, there's a lot of young people on 0 hour contracts. So terms and conditions at the moment, they don't really have any, I don't know, not incentive, but there isn't a feeling of security there, is there? So they kind of feel if you're going to go out and you're going to join a union and you're going to have a voice, then what happens?
It is difficult, and one of the problems as well is that employers will see this gap and sort of push the boundary further, at the expense of young people who are in these precarious work situations.
Mm.
Um, but ultimately, I think it's better to sort of see it as inaction, what inaction will do. Obviously, if people don't join a union, then what I talk about of employers pushing the boundaries, this will just continue. I think there's obviously a lot of work to be done, and it is extremely difficult, especially in these fragmented workplaces. Um, and as you say, very precarious work situations for most people. But ultimately, not doing anything makes the situation worse. I think
Mm-hmm.
there are things that there's obviously two ways that you can achieve these sorts of changes, and one is pushing individual employers to make changes, and that's what having a good network of trade unions does. Is in those places there'll be branches that will deal with one specific employer, for example, and they can be incredibly useful in bargaining with that one specific employer for better rights. I mean, a great example of this is with Uber drivers, um,
Okay.
where previously there wasn't any agreement between any of the trade unions and Uber as a company. And I think again this was Unite, who Unite the union, who recently got recognition from Uber to represent their drivers. And off the back of that, they've had a number of good court cases, which has made Uber recognize them as employees, which means they get sick pay, holiday pay, that sort of thing, rather than as self-employed workers.
Mm.
Because when they have to work incredibly long shifts just to make a living, it and at the call of Uber, then arguably they are employees. I think that's a great example of where trade unions can win with an individual employer, certainly. And that's obviously an argument for joining a trade union. But then obviously the collective power as well is obviously going to be a bigger force. And the other side of that is with my union, Unison, have been campaigning for a pay rise for NHS staff. Obviously, a much broader set of employees there, but the power of a big collective trade union with loads of branches individually coming together means that we've been pushing for that, for a larger rise to compensate not just for the pandemic, but for around a decade of wage stagnation, which means that in real terms they've had their pay cut. So
Okay.
I think it's both of those. It's having those voices in individual employers to make the lives of the employees in those individual companies better, but also it's, you know, having that big collective force to push for big topics and big issues. Another one of these is the 0 hours contracts, as you mentioned. That's a current TUC campaign, a trade union congress. It's the organization that organizes all of the trade unions. That's a campaign that they're working on at the moment, is to ban 0 hours contracts, and that's something that comes off the back of that, the size of the trade union movement of almost 6 million people. That has a tremendous amount of weight behind it.
So that's great. I mean, those are really good campaigns. I hope you see amazing results from. So if there's a young person, what are the requirements to join? How would you know? Like, what is the age for joining?
I think it's as soon as you start work, really. I know that my union covers people from age 16 upwards, because obviously there are 16-year-olds who do apprenticeships and stuff like that. So they're covered. Really 16 upwards. In the trade union movement, we tend to think of young members as anywhere between 16 and sort of 27. That's the sort of age cohort. But anyone can get involved, really. There's a small fee involved, but what that does is give us the power to do these campaigns. Ultimately, all of the trade unions are accountable to their members, which means that the money that you pay in, you get to decide how that's spent through elections, and, you know, having your say in the organizational structure of the unions. And what it does is it gives the unions the resources to help employees individually as well as, you know, collectively. And I know that my union does it proportional to wages. So apprenticeships, for example, only pay £10 a year, and
It's really
then
good.
full-time employees are done in accordance with how much they earn, so that, you know, the people that can afford to pay more do pay more.
So what are the other benefits?
So as well as that collective action, you get individual representation. So if you're involved with an issue at work, whether it's you know, anything from, you think your pay has been withheld, or whether you're being bullied or harassed or anything like that, you can go to your union, and you'll have a union rep who will know the employee, the employer that they're dealing with, the workplace that they're dealing with, and who bring that knowledge and experience, because ultimately they're probably going to be your colleagues, to represent you. They'll be trained to understand employment law and understand the procedures of workplaces. So they're there to act as a voice on behalf of employees when it comes to issues with employers or issues in the workplace, to make sure that everyone's treated fairly and everyone is treated with respect in the workplace. So on a broad range of workplace issues, trade unions are there. As well as that, you know, most trade unions will follow through it if it gets to the worst situation where someone's dismissed, for example, and the trade unions think there's a case there. It will be passed on to lawyers to take to an employment tribunal, so that that member is, you know, fairly compensated, or, you know, that avenue is pursued. There's a range of other benefits as well. I know that my union provides different sort of legal and financial advice, but that varies between unions. But there's a range of support there for everyone, young members as well, young workers.
How do you communicate with them? Like, what do you use?
So in my workplace, email is the best thing because I work for the county council. We're all in the same employer, really, so it's easier to communicate and work that way. But across the unions, I know that WhatsApp has been incredibly useful for workers in more fragmented workplaces, service sector places like that. We're trying to get better. This is one of the things that I've been pushing for, is that I feel like the as I mentioned, the trade union movement isn't particularly good at communicating stuff to members. We're obviously on social media. That's something I've been trying to push for as well. There's a range of ways to communicate, but yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that is because young people predominantly use a very much more social media, Instagram, and all that kind of stuff. And if they don't know about you, how are they going to join? How are they going to know that there is something they could be part of to make a difference? A lot of young people are very emotional. They're very quite driven by social change and want to see the world fairer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that the trade union movement has been slow on. There's certainly not just myself, but there's other young members that I speak to within my union and other unions who recognize this as a problem. And there's certainly a discrepancy when it comes to different unions and how good they are at communicating on social media and stuff like that. I think it's something that we definitely need to get better at. I think WhatsApp has been incredibly useful in certain circumstances because it means that there's like a small community that you can get regular communication out to. But certainly on the broader picture of people not knowing what trade unions are, not understanding and stuff like that, I think that's certainly something we do need to get better at, and something that hopefully we will do soon. When you look at sort of protests recently that have been organized almost entirely through social media platforms, Instagram, stuff like that, I think it's sort of a bit naive to dismiss these things as like, oh, not useful. There's social media. It's something not useful to us. Like, that's how young people communicate, and that's how the communities that young people form. They're online now. I think that's the trade union movement has been a bit resistant to change because a lot of people in positions of power within the trade unions tend to be older, and I don't want to sort of talk badly on them, but I do think they've been a bit resistant to change, and I don't think they fully understand the potential of what social media can do in these circumstances. I do think that there is a lot of work to be done there. I've been thinking about this, and I mean, with a bit of a sort of historical context of the trade union movement, what you see is that in the past, the trade union movement was very much a part of the community. And, you think of mining communities and stuff like that, places which had labor clubs, and it was very much a part of the community. It was where people would go in an evening to like socialize or whatever. And I think one way that the trade union movement could improve is if we look at social media in that light of, well, it's creating a community. Young people form relationships, form friendships, all of these sorts of things online now. They form communities online. If we're not in those spaces making the case for trade unions, then what's the point? I think it's good to put it like in that term with an analogy of, well, in the past we were in communities and making the case in person in labor clubs and stuff like that. This is just the sort of technological equivalent, like the modern equivalent of it. I think
that's an amazing idea, and I love that analogy, because that is I didn't start in the labor club, but that kind of community thing is where I absolutely grew up and where I learnt more about who I am and having a voice. And is part of the reason I've worked with young people for the last 25 plus years,
Mm.
because I see the power in that. I felt the power in that.
Yeah, I think this is part of the issue, is that I it's not just with trade unions, but young people are shifting more and more online, and you see it all the time. There's polls that come out of like young people are less likely to talk to neighbors, less likely to get involved in sort of hyper local social campaigns, and yet that's not to say that they're not aware of the issues, that they don't want to be engaged. I think because that's often the conclusion that's drawn, is that, oh well, young people aren't talking to people in their communities, well, they must not want to get involved. When I think it's again a bit like of a naive assessment. It's not that they don't want to get involved, it's that how they are getting involved is changed. It's becoming more online, and if not only the trade union movement but social movements as a broader thing, if they don't evolve with that, then I think there'll be a bit of a problem there.
Luca, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self, say your 16, 17-year-old self, as you're getting more passionate about being an activist, if you go back and tell yourself one piece of advice that would make the last couple of years quicker or smoother, what would you say?
I'm not too sure. I think have confidence in my own ability. I think that's something that sort of held me back a bit, is that I always think, well, there's someone that's probably going to do this thing better, someone that will make the case for this better. I think, if I'd had a bit more confidence earlier on, then it would have helped me a lot to take up opportunities that I could have used and made an impact with. I think that's the advice that I would probably give to myself.
Yeah, that's lovely advice, because I'm sure there are lots of young people out there thinking, or somebody else will say it, somebody else will flag it up, or somebody who's older or more articulate or whatever, but actually they can. So if they are feeling that, you would say, have more confidence. How can they have more confidence? What can they do practically?
I think just don't be put off by things. I think like there's very few times where I've actually had pushback, I guess. When it comes to sharing ideas, everyone's I think there's sometimes a perception that you'll be shouted down and stuff like that, and it does happen, of course, but I think ultimately the way that you develop as a person is by sharing your ideas and stuff like that. I think not being afraid to share your thoughts and ideas, I think that's important, and ultimately you'll grow as a person, you'll gain more experience of how to make your point more articulately, as you say. I think it's important to take up every opportunity that presents itself, I think, and even if it's not the right one, it will give you experience and might open up a range of other opportunities, I think.
Cool. So thank you so much for your time, Luca. Thank you for sharing your ideas and inspiring us to look at what the trade unions offer us. I'm going to put a link in the description on how to find out what one is relevant to you and where your local branch is. So guys, thanks for listening, and I'm believing and trusting that you've learned some vital information in this. So take care. Bye.